All right, Grifter, you good to go? I'll give you an introduction.
Sure.
All right, everybody, we are ready for the next talk. So I'm going to go ahead and put everybody in the audience area on mute. If you would like to continue talking, though, feel free to go back in the lobby area. You can still listen to the talk and actually speak once you're outside of the main area here. So next we have Grifter, and I'm excited to have Grifter speak. Grifter, this is actually his second time at Infosec Oasis, so we're really excited to have him back for a second year. He did awesome last year. If you don't know, Grifter's been around for quite a while. I think he's almost 20 years in Infosec, and he's been a member of the Black Hat staff and DEF CON staff for just about as long. He is a threat hunter and in IR for RSA. So I think we're going to see a lot of really practical knowledge here. So everybody give it up for Grifter.
Yay, me. What's up? So I guess we'll just roll into it. I'm going to try to do this with my headset on, so it should be really interesting. I just want to kind of try to have the full experience. So who am I? As he mentioned, I'm Grifter. Like, that's what I go by most of the time. My name's Neil Wyler, but everybody just calls me Grifter. By day, I'm a principal threat hunter for RSA. So I basically spend my time hunting in our largest customer environments. Like, they send me out for 3 days to a week or something to sit down and go through all their logs, packets, endpoint data, everything that any types of data that they have, to try to look for stuff that our devices aren't normally finding, right? Or things that could be potential risks for the organization in the future, that type of thing. By night, I help run all of the technical operations for the Black Hat security briefings with that guy over there, so with Stumper. I've been doing that for about 18 years. I'm also one of the lead organizers at DEF CON, so I run all the contests and events and all the demo labs, all that good stuff. I've been doing that for 20 years. So I'm part of the review boards. I help pick the content for Black Hat and DEF CON. I help run the SOC at RSA conference. I speak a lot. I've done some books, stuff like that. All of these things are supposed to apparently impress you into listening to me. But whatever. They impressed my mom. That's kind of nice. Like, I don't know. But yeah, so let's roll into it. I got a lot of stuff to cover. So let's talk about what threat hunting is. Well, when you look at this definition right here, where it's threat hunting is proactively searching through data in order to detect threats which have evaded traditional security measures, and that's great. That's a nice shiny definition for people who maybe aren't into InfoSec, or that's not their primary focus, right? So what we're saying is, like, here's something to help you understand what it is we're doing. When for us, for hackers, for InfoSec folks, threat hunting is just essentially doing IR before you know that you're owned. It's a lot of the same processes. It's going and investigating things and trying to figure out one, if the attacker is there, and if they are, then how they got in and all that type of stuff. So it's a lot of the same practices that incident response has, and it's important to note that that hunting, because you're going out and looking for attackers that are persisting within an environment, sometimes you find them, right? Which is the goal, but sometimes you find them, and what that means is that you will then shift into incident response. So it's important for your hunters or your analysts to be familiar with an incident response plan, because if they're not, you're gonna have a bad day. You want them to know who to wake up, who the phone calls are, alert the lawyers, whatever. Also, what hunting is it's human driven, right? This isn't device driven. Despite what expo floors and business halls at different conferences will tell you, you'll walk around and you'll see giant banners up that say, like, automate your threat hunting, automate your hunts, and all that stuff. Threat hunting is a person that is sitting down with a particular skill set and working to try to find either one, the attacker, or two, misconfigurations that increase your attack surface and allow an attacker more chances at getting into your environment. It's proactive, right? It's not reactive. That's one of the nicest things about it is I can tell you as someone who was once an analyst, that analyst fatigue is real, and just responding to alerts all the time can be incredibly draining, right? We don't want to always be saying like, oh, okay, I'm getting this incident. Let me go make sure our mitigations worked. Yes, it looks like they did. Let me put in my notes. And then I take the next incident and I do it again and again and again. So it's nice that it's proactive, because the proactive portion of it is what makes it actually fun for the analyst or for the threat hunter. You kind of get to choose what it is that you want to do. It's also iterative, right? This is not something that's random. At times it can feel like it's random when you're looking through stuff and then you're like, oh, like what's that there and what's this here and that looks interesting over here. I'm going to take a look at that. And you're just jumping around. But what you should be doing while you're doing that stuff is taking notes, right? So write down the stuff that you're finding, like, and so that you can go back and do it again. When you find data that's interesting to you, you're going to want to be able to replicate that data or create some kind of automation or report that delivers that interesting data to you from that point forward. So instead of having to click through 14 different things in whatever tool it is that you're using to help assist in the hunt, you're going to be able to just have a report delivered to your email every morning that says, oh, here are the least common things that showed up in this particular area. And so you can, quickly run through those. Right. So yeah, make sure that hunting should be repeatable. What it's not. It's not just hitting Control F and looking for an IOC. Part of my role as a principal threat hunter means that I go out sometimes into customer environments or partners environments and things, and I assess their hunting program and kind of try to be consultative about it, give them tips on like, here's how this can improve, or you could find better data, that kind of thing. So it's not just taking a threat intelligence feed that's a bunch of IP addresses or host names or domains and then just searching through for those in environments. And I've gone into organizations where they were like, this is how we hunt. That's not hunting. That's just Googling for an IOC, essentially, right? As I mentioned before, it's not automated. This is not something you're just going to deploy another device in your environment and have it go. That's not what we're looking for here. It's also not new. The term threat hunting is fairly new. It's only a few years old, and it sounds sexy, and it like puts an umbrella over like all of these different concepts that we have been doing essentially for years. If you have been stat counting things in Excel sheets to see like, oh, if I have 1,000 endpoints, but only 2 endpoints have these processes kicking off, like that, stat counting stuff like that is hunting. We've been doing this. Now we just put a big, again, umbrella over it, a big name over it, and said, this is what we're doing. It's also not wizardry, right? And now like threat hunter, like the title of threat hunter sounds super cool. I like having it on my business card. It's like, he's a threat hunter. Like it sounds like it's just, it's neat. But in reality, it's anybody can do it. It can be done by a junior analyst. It can be done by anyone. It's just that you find that thing that individual is interested in or that they have the most experience in, and you focus their hunting around that thing. It's great to have somebody who has been around for a long time and has a general knowledge of a lot of different areas that can go in and do a full hunt across multiple protocols, across multiple operating systems and network environments and things like that. But if you don't have that and you still want your folks to hunt, just figure out what are the things they're the best at and then have them focus their hunts there. All right. Well, why do we want to hunt? Well, we're going to hunt because we want to find, previously undetected threats. That's what this is about, is making sure that if an attacker is within our environment and the devices that we bought and configured and deployed aren't triggering on something, that we go out and find it ourselves. We want to reduce the dwell time that an attacker persists within the environment, and so going out and searching for attackers, even if there are no current indicators that they're there, inevitably leads to you finding something that can improve the overall security posture of your organization. You'll find either, again, one, the attacker, or two, something that an attacker could use to get a foothold in your environment. We also want to hunt because it helps us learn our environment better than we ever have before, right? Like this is one of the huge, I think, hidden return on investments for an organization that employs hunters or uses hunters. You want to have your folks looking at the way that you set up your environment and saying, like, why do we do this? Like, question everything. Why did we choose this as the golden image for our endpoints? Why did we choose this for this particular host? Why do we use these protocols and not these ones? And ask those questions and work with the teams within the organization to answer those questions. And as you build those relationships, it means that when eventually something does kick off and there is a breach or you detect a breach, being able to work within those relationships and understand this is why we do these things the way we do will help you respond to that more quickly. And also, just while you're hunting, if you know, we don't use those protocols, so why am I seeing them, right? It's that kind of thing. Actually, like Larry mentioned that, where he's like, why is this protocol for jet engines in this environment? That's exactly the type of thing that a hunter would want to look for. They'd say, why is this showing up? It allows us to increase the speed that we respond, and it gives us an advantage over our attacker. I can assure you, as somebody who spent many years on the offensive side of security, that the first thing an attacker is going to do when they come into your environment is to learn everything that they possibly can about it, so that they can, continue to persist or move laterally and that kind of thing. So the attackers are going to spend the time to learn your environment. You might as well, do the same. So again, I mentioned, finding the bad guys, right? But also it just hunting also improves your overall organizational posture. It's going to allow you to find the misconfigurations that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise. So when you're in there and you're digging around and you're trying to find something, you may say, wait, that looks wrong, or why does this user have this set of permissions when they shouldn't? And you'll be able to, correct those things before they're used against you. And that is the kind of thing that hunting, provides value for, even when you're not finding an attacker. So that's going to help reduce your overall attack surface. So it gives less opportunity to the folks who are coming after you. And that, is a net positive. So one thing, and I'm going to beat this like a dead horse throughout this presentation, but you got to write stuff down. Documentation matters. It's the whole, if a tree falls in the woods and no one was around to hear it, well, if a hunt took place and nobody wrote anything down, did it actually take place, right? Because what are you going to learn from it if you didn't document what it is that you gained from that hunt? It allows you to also not only report something back to the organization and say, this is how I spent my time, but it's good for like performance reviews and stuff like that as well, just from a selfish standpoint, to say like, oh, I identified these gaps. I was able to find these things. We found, we created this many new alerts or rules or whatever it was based on these hunts, right? So, what we want to do is document the gaps that we found. So anything that is, a misconfiguration or a vulnerability that we discover, any potential issues that we find, how we escalated those to get them, resolved, and then how that was, who it was handled by as well, right? So we're building documentation of a path to the solution, and that will help other hunters as they come in, or other analysts as they come in, understand, oh, this is how we escalate these types of situations. When we go in and do a hunt, we come up with a hypothesis. We say like, okay, if I was an attacker and I was trying to exfiltrate data from this environment, I would exfiltrate that data from this area over here. And then we go and we look in that area and we say like, is that true? Like, is this the place that somebody would take that? So when we come up with those questions, where would somebody exfiltrate data, or how would I move laterally within the environment? What are our most vulnerable servers? And I believe an attacker would do this thing. Write that down so that you have the path that you took to investigate that for other folks in the future. It also helps because even if you don't find anything, you can say like, well, this is what we thought about, and this is what our idea was, and we went and looked through these things, and that's how we spent our time. And that's hugely important to management, because sometimes multi-hour hunts or a day-long hunt can it can yield what essentially comes out to I don't know, nothing, right? It shouldn't be nothing. It should be here's what we gained, and we learned this about these protocols and how they work in our environment. So we also want to write down any new alerts, right, or automated detections that we created. So if we discover new IOCs, or we create new rules, or we have an automation solution and we build a new, a playbook or something like that, write all that stuff down. That's incredibly valuable, and it shows the value in spending the time on the hunt, even if you're not finding exfiltration to China, right? And then, of course, any incidents that you discover. So if you find an attacker or a compromised host or in the environment, write that down. Again, it's great to have documentation, all this, who was on the team, who helped discover it, and it's good for the organization. It shows the value of the hunt, and it's good for your, when you're asking for a raise. So. All right. So what are the data sets, right, that we're looking at when we're hunting? What do we care about? Well, we start with the gold standard for decades, and probably the gold standard for decades to come, right? And that's logs. So, it's 2021. Storage is cheap. Log everything. Maybe the tool that you use to organize all those logs isn't necessarily cheap, but storage is cheap, so log it all. If it creates a log, log it. And even if you don't look at your logs, but please look at your logs. But even if you don't, let's say you just dump all of it to disk somewhere, should you end up having an incident, should there be a breach and you need to go in and investigate it, at least you'll have that data to hand off to the incident response team and say, we don't know how they got in, we don't know how long they've been there, we don't know whatever, but I've got 6 months or a year's worth of logs, so here they are, right? And that the IR team will be pretty happy about that. But don't forget network data, right? We need to understand things like what our ingress and egress points are. So how does data flow in and out of our network? What the subnet roles are. And then this one is huge, established directionality. Like the way that data moves around the environment. Is the data that you're looking at going outbound to, the internet? Is it coming inbound from the internet? Is it moving laterally within the organization, right? So we want to understand how data flows, because there are things that we might care about if they're coming into the environment that we don't care about if it's going out. And so that changes context around the types of data that you're looking at. So we want to make sure that that we understand that. I can say that when I go out into a new environment, the first half of the first day is normally spent doing just this, is understanding how data flows around that environment and how things are configured in that environment, so I know what I'm looking at. And then for me, a huge one, and this is also just because I'm a giant packet nerd, but full packet capture. Full packet capture is what is essentially, the way that I look at it, is video surveillance for your network. Where you have logs, those are great, but full packet capture allows you to rebuild and recreate the entire session or sessions that make up an attack or what was going on in that environment. This means that if an attacker uses a specific tool, you can extract that tool from the packet captures, rebuild it, and then throw it in a sandbox and see what it does, right? You can, if somebody's exfiltrating something, it means that when you look at it, you can say, well, what did they take? And that changes the way that you respond to a breach significantly. If you don't know what they took, then you have to err on the side of this could be the worst possible scenario. But if you can then go in and look at the packet data, rebuild what the attackers exfiltrated and say, it looks like they got this, this, and this, that changes your response drastically. So again, you wouldn't build a building today without putting cameras on that building. No one would be like, I built this giant office building, and it's like, well, what's your video surveillance setup like? And it's like, we decided not to. We got badge scanners on the door, so when someone comes in, they badge in, like it says, that they showed up, so we know who's in the building and who's left the building and that kind of thing. And full packet capture is that video surveillance where it's like, instead of saying, I see that Grifter badged in at 8 a.m. You can actually go in and look and say, is that actually him? What did he interact with? It looks like when he came in, he had an empty box. When he came in, he moved from this room to this room to this room. And as he did, he put different things into that box. And then he left at the end of the day and the box was full. What's in the box? With just a RFID scanner on the door, you don't know what's in the box. But with video surveillance, you do. So full packet capture, video surveillance for your network. Please, 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 if you're not using it, use it. And then, of course, endpoint behavioral data. So, I'm going to get into this more in a little bit, but you want to inventory all your processes, what your scheduled tasks are, like any services that show up that shouldn't be there. All of those kinds of things are, incredibly important data to help you understand how an attacker is interacting with a host, right? So, or how they're trying to persist within that environment. So having that data is crucial. All right, so let's talk a little bit about methods. So where do we start, right? Well, threat hunting is essentially about situational awareness, right? It's about understanding what normal looks like on your network, right? So what that means is that you need to create a baseline. At some point, all of us are handed an environment. Not many of us are in a situation where we get to build our environment from the ground up. So we're handed an environment, and we have to draw a line in the sand and say, I feel like we're not owned, right? Like at this point, we don't have somebody in this environment. We're not owned, and we draw a baseline and we say, this is normal traffic. This is the normal processes that exist on these hosts. This is the normal way that we work, and this is like clean. It's a clean environment. I will caution that there are tools out there like UEBA tools, so user and entity behavioral analytics, things that will go in and set a baseline for you. So you deploy something into your environment and you allow it to watch the way that your hosts and network traffic and things all interact or work for up a month or more. It says, okay, this is a baseline, and then anything that goes outside of that, it will then alert you on. Before you deploy something like that, please, please, please put hunters in place to make sure that they go and look, because if you deploy something to set a baseline and an attacker already is within your environment, then that tool is just going to baseline that attacker's movements as normal, and it's never going to alert on them as something out of the ordinary, because what it's seeing is the attacker has always been there, and so it looks like it belongs. So pay attention for stuff like that. Go in and look for them. Once you become aware of what normal looks like in your environment, the anomalies, the things, the outliers should stick out like a sore thumb. You'll see them stick out to you. It's important to note, though, when you find those outliers, you see those outliers, that they will always be interesting, but they might not always be evil. So it may not be that you're finding, organized crime ring in Russia. Ooh, this is amazing. Like, you may not find that type of thing, and honestly, you don't want to find that kind of thing, right? So it's important to understand, though, that as long as you have the right mindset and you go into it saying, okay, even if this isn't something that's terrible, it will at least we'll learn something from it, right? We'll understand better our environment and how it works, right? And so that is important. That is valuable. It's important to leave your preconceived notions at the door. Don't start with an IOC. Start out with a question. So these are the questions like, if data is leaving my environment, what's the most likely place it would leave? If I was attacker, how would I attack us? Those types of things. So start out with some kind of question, that hypothesis that's so important. And when you start your hunt, have a plan. So have a plan, be ready to adapt, because that plan will likely change, or what you're looking for will likely change. But know what it is that you're hoping to go find, and then go look for it. And if you don't find it, don't get discouraged. Like, just adjust your hypothesis, get another hypothesis, and move forward. But when you're out there and you're searching for the thing that you're interested in, stay flexible. You're going to end up looking for something at the start, and then I call it like seeing something shiny. So if you're seeing something shiny, then what you want to do is look at that thing that got your attention. It is something that stuck out to you, and you were like, whoa, what's that? Or, oh, that's weird, or that's odd. That's the thing you should be interested in now, because it got your attention. This is where the ADHD that's so prevalent within our industry is actually a good thing. If you see something shiny, pivot, like focus on that thing for a little bit, like see what it is and why it got your attention, because there's a reason that it did. Go with that. And if you feel like, oh, I really need to go down this path, like this is what I'm focused on right now, then that's fine. Focus on your hunt, but open another tab or something. Make sure that that shiny thing does get addressed. I do this often when I'm hunting in customer environments. I'll just open another tab, open another tab, open another tab, open another tab. And I just know that I'm not done for the day until all those tabs are closed. That investigation's not complete until everything's been addressed. So prepare to pivot. There's going to be a lot of them. And then a big one for me, and I know this will sound odd coming from somebody who works for a vendor who who sells tools and stuff like that, but find the tools that work for you. And I don't care what those tools are. They don't have to be RSA tools. They don't have to be vendor tools. They can be open source. They can be whatever. But find the tools that help you make sense of all of that different data that you're collecting, and find the tools that your analysts or your hunters want to use. If you're, it doesn't matter how expensive or shiny or how long the feature set is of the tool that you go ahead and deploy within your environment, if your analysts or your hunters don't want to use it. So just find the tools that work for your team and make sure that you're working with them to decide what those tools are. Don't just let like some sales rep come in and like just steamroll you into buying something. If you work for like a university or something like that, and you have a bunch of students, you can throw it in open source projects. And not only do they have to manage it, but they also have to use it. Then awesome, throw a bunch of students at it or throw a bunch of interns at it, whatever it is that you have to do. But if you're not in that situation and you're, a security team of 4 people, maybe it is better to go and buy the shiny tool from whatever vendor to make it so that you can, have somebody to call with support and that kind of thing. But that's just my opinion. So, and then of course I said I was going to keep saying this over, document everything that you're doing and what you're learning. And then please, please, please share it. Threat hunting is still kind of the Wild West. There's a bunch of different frameworks. Everybody thinks they've got a different way of doing it. And they do. And all of those ways of doing it are great. What matters is that whatever you find, that you're sharing that with other folks. This is where again, another thing that's so prevalent in our industry and our community, imposter syndrome, can kill us all. The thing that you found that was useful for you may be the thing that saves another company or makes it so that they discover an attacker persisting within their environment before exfiltration takes place. So if you find something interesting or a new way to hunt or do something, please share that, whether that's a white paper, a conference talk, or just a tweet that you send out that says, hey, I found this cool way of doing whatever. Please share it. It will maybe help somebody else. And if it helps one other company, then it's worth it. So get it out there. All right. So when we're talking about hypothesis or coming up with a question, the thing to go and hunt for, what we need to do is understand, well, how do I come up with that question, right? Because sometimes you're just like, well, I don't know what to go look for. A good way to do that is to follow this path, essentially, where you're going to look at your business and you're going to say, what kind of business am I in? Am I in energy? Am I in oil and gas? Am I in entertainment? What is it that we do? And because we do that thing, what data do we have that is interesting to other attackers? Essentially, what is the types of stuff that attackers would come after in our organization? Assign business criticality to those things. Like, is this something that would make it so that our business is no longer functional? Is this something that puts us on the 10 o'clock news? Those types of things. Assign that risk, assess what the risk is to individual applications and assets. And then for that, understand what are the probable attack vectors for those things. So if I have this particular web application, what are the attack vectors that somebody's going to use to come at that? And for those attack vectors, what are the techniques they're going to use? And what are the artifacts that will be left behind by those techniques? For all those different artifacts, understand what tools apply, right? And when I say tools, I mean 2 things. One, your tools. If you identify these are the types of artifacts that are left behind by this attack vector or this technique, do we have a tool that helps us detect that? And if we can't see it, how do we close that gap. But also, what is the tool that creates that artifact, right? So it's like, okay, well, this is the type of thing that's left behind. That's left behind by these types of tools, and identify those things. Document it. Again, write it down, write it down, write it down. Tribal knowledge sucks. So write down why you have decided to go that way, and what it is that you're investigating, and why the risk was there, and how people are going to come at it. Write all those things down, and then red team and blue team it if you can. I believe that emulation is the key to salvation. If you can emulate the most likely attackers to come at you, and your blue team or defensive folks can't detect that, well, then you have some work to do, right? So if you believe like, okay, well, we're in this type of industry, we have these types of assets, and we know that these groups are interested in those particular assets, then you're like, all right, well, APT 29 is going to be interested in us. So let's go ahead and see what their techniques are, and go look at threat intelligence around that particular group. Get our red team to emulate the techniques that group uses, and hopefully we see it. And if we don't see it, we know that group is the type of group that targets us, and we can't see their normal types of attacks. That is incredibly, incredibly valuable to your organization. So do that kind of thing, and then do it over and over and over again. Assess your assets, figure out what the risks are, what are the techniques and tools, emulate them, see if you can detect them, do it again and again and again. A good way to find some of that interesting information or ways to help seed a hypothesis is through the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And if you're not familiar with MITRE ATT&CK, please make yourself familiar with MITRE ATT&CK. It is an incredible source of threat intelligence, and it's the threat intelligence that really matters. So TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. It's the way that attackers or organized crime, like government, state-sponsored actors, those type of things, how they conduct business. Like TTPs are really high on the pyramid of pain. If you're not familiar with the pyramid of pain, make yourself familiar with the pyramid of pain. David J. Bianco's pyramid of pain. What that means is it's really painful for an attacker to change the way that they do business, right? So it's not hard for them to do something like change an IP address, a host name, or a file hash. That type of intelligence is really useful for a very short amount of time. So we don't really we can use that if it's new. It's very high fidelity for a small window. But MITRE ATT&CK is full of TTP type of stuff. And if I have some time and I'm just like kicking around during the day, sometimes I'll just go into MITRE ATT&CK and I'll just click around, go down the wiki rabbit hole, and hopefully learn something, right? So another thing that's nice about MITRE ATT&CK is you get these like matrices where it tells you like, okay, well, here's an attack vector. If here is what the techniques are, and here are the types of data sources. So we have like a different type of data source that is useful for that type of attack, right? So, or that type of technique. So if it's a web shell, logs are okay, endpoint or packet data is great, but NetFlow is useless, right? So, and we identify what those attack techniques are going to be for different areas, and we can fill this in and say, well, here's where we have coverage on those things. And this is great to give to management, to executives, to stuff like that. If you're looking to get like either additional headcount, budget, time to hunt, whatever it is, you can fill this out for how your organization stands on visibility into these different attack techniques. And if you can walk in and say, look, we are in this type of business, we have these types of assets, they're interesting to these groups, we know these groups attack these types of things, they use these techniques, and we can't see it. Right now, our visibility cannot see that type of attack. And I need budget to go out and buy devices or get more headcount so that we can have the coverage to be able to see that type of technique from those attackers. And so that's great because it gives you the ammo you need to go have those conversations. But it's also great because if 6 months later a breach happens and you can go back in and say, yes, they use this technique. And if you remember, I told you we didn't have visibility into that. And normally the first head to roll after a large breach is the CISO, right? So instead of being the chief information scapegoat officer, they get to stay the chief information security officer, and they get to go back to their desk because they can say, I gave you the data that you needed to tell you that the risk was there, and you chose to ignore that thing. So I'm going to keep my job. I'm going to go back to my desk. I look forward to additional budget. All right, so let's talk about some practical hunting. So things to that you can do. One thing before we roll into it, what's interesting about a lot of this stuff, and again, I built these slides as more like a reference. That's why there's so much stuff on it, or I even call out specific event IDs. If you want the slides, then you can just go grab them, right? And so you can look at them later and say, oh, here's interesting stuff to go look at when we're doing a hunt. And so you want to look at some of these things that would, in some cases, be normal. It's normal for an environment to have, processes being created or doing different things, but it may not be normal for that process to be created outside a certain time frame by a certain user, or after a user logs in and uses a different set of credentials. So when we stack these things and we build layer upon layer upon layer, that is the type of thing that suddenly becomes interesting. It may not be interesting that there's a new process on a host, but like I said, if it goes outside of a certain time frame, if it's done by a user who's never kicked that process off before, if that department should never do that type of thing, these layers suddenly become more and more interesting. So check your security logs for things like process creation, right? It's easy to do, right? Ensure that the process names that you have match the allowed software that you've decided for your environment. And if you have the ability to, verify the file hashes for those executables that you're kicking off those processes, right? Are they known good? Do they match what we have set in our baselines? I often, and this is true not just of endpoint stuff or processes, but I normally will focus an investigation on a 24-hour window. It gives me a digestible time frame to look at that hypothesis, and then if I see something shiny or I see something odd, I will focus on whatever that is, that particular host, IP address, whatever, and then I expand that window to 3 days, 7 days. So if I find a user that I'm suddenly interested in, then I expand to 3, 5, 7, 14 days, however long that retention is, to see if there's more odd behavior in that time frame. But in this case, do something like choose a 24-hour window, look at the processes that have only executed maybe once or twice, right? So what are those outliers? Like, this is a game of outliers. So look for the stuff. If you have 1,000 hosts, but only 3 of them have a certain process running on them, what is that process? And then you do what we essentially have done all our lives, right? As soon as we started sitting behind a keyboard, at least from a security standpoint, where I know you've done this on your machine at home. You're looking at your processes and you're like, what the hell is that? I don't know what that one is. And so you like grab the name and you drop it into Google, and you're like, oh, okay, is that malware? What is that? Oh no, I'm still not getting it. All right, I'm gonna grab a hash from it, and I'm gonna throw that into VirusTotal and see if there's any hits on that. And then I really don't know what that is. I'm gonna throw it in a sandbox, right? So these are the things that you're doing. You're just doing them in your your corporate environment or whatever. You're saying, okay, well, that's odd. I've got this outlier. What the hell is it? And you go and do that investigation until you identify, is this something that I should be worried about? Again, threat hunting is not wizardry. It's not rocket surgery. This is not always hard. It can lend results with just simple things like saying, what the hell is that thing? And then once you've done something like this, like I said, where you can, threat hunting isn't automated, but let's say you're like, okay, I have 1,000 hosts. Of those 1,000 hosts, I want to know what are the numbers of processes that are out there on the lowest number of hosts in my environment. Give me a report of that every day. I want that to show up in my inbox at 8 a.m. So when you come in, you can sit down and say, oh, it looks like we have a low number of processes kicking off in a low number of machines. I'm just going to go verify what those are. So again, it helps you build out your program. It helps you build additional playbooks, that type of thing. We want to look for things like, if there's a parent process relationship that might be an issue, right? So if we see command.exe being run from winword.exe, or, we want to look for stuff that's just odd. If we see PowerShell making network connections, like what's it doing? That's odd. Again, this is about going and looking at outliers and things that make you say, well, I don't know about that. And then, adding them to your allow or deny list if they turn out to be normal. Sometimes things that look really scary turn out to be completely normal for that environment. And so it's not always going to be bad, right? But it will be interesting. You'll learn, oh, that's how we do this, or oh, we implement that protocol in this particular way. That's interesting. So look for stuff like SVC host being launched by anything other than services.exe, right? This should be easy to build an alert on or do anything, or go in and look and say, hey, what is that? That's odd. Any processes that have missing company names and product versions. Again, there will be processes that have these types of things. Maybe somebody just didn't do it, or it's a lazy developer, or just not in there. And that might be fine for whatever that application is, but it's not, in this case, normal, right? And so if it's not normal, then we want to go and look and say, all right, it looks like that is actually fine for that particular process. We'll go ahead and add that to the allow list, and we won't spend time on it in the future. We want to look for processes that are similar names to legitimate processes. So something like a string similarity algorithm is great here, where you can say, okay, instead of it being svc host.exe, it's srvc host.exe, or svc h0st, right? So we want to look for stuff that's trying to pass off as something legitimate, but it's not legitimate. So, look for stuff like that, things that are masquerading as something else. And also just processes that are starting from odd locations, right? If it shouldn't be kicking off from somewhere that executable doesn't belong, then look for those things. Just overall oddities, right? So when it comes to scripting, if we're seeing things like WScript or PowerShell, being kicked off by users who don't do any scripting, that's something that we care about. It should be easy for you to create lists of who the users are, and again, add that to your baseline. I can only imagine that when I start at any new company, I set off every alarm within that company just based off of the kind of traffic that I'm doing, or applications I'm kicking off, or things I'm trying to install, that kind of thing. I imagine that it is just a shit show. And then they're just like, oh, it's Grifter. Oh, it's Grifter. Oh, it's Grifter, right? So, and they just assume that whatever nonsense is coming from my machine, that I'm doing it on purpose. So look for stuff like encoded command being invoked, right? So if you see like PowerShell with encoded command, what is it that's being encoded? What are they? And in this case, I don't know if it's reality, but like, what are they trying to hide? Maybe they're not hiding it. They're just saying, oh, I'm trying to obfuscate whatever it is that I'm doing. So why is that taking place? And then this is just advice from Grifter: use a naming convention for your scripts, and then alert on any scripts outside of that naming convention. So if you see something that's like outside of that, like an attacker has to learn that first when they get in. If there's something that goes outside the normal naming convention, it should stick out. So let's pay attention to stuff like that. Users being added to a privileged group. Know when IT is going to do that. When are they going to perform those additions? Like what accounts are they going to use to add those things? So when you're looking for somebody setting up, persistence, or they're trying to move laterally in your environment, they're going to do these kind of things. So look for users being added to those privileged groups. And then another one here: collect bash history in a central location. That might sound odd, right? But watching somebody at a command line, it can be incredibly informative about the skill set of that individual, right? So if you're sitting behind somebody and they're at the keyboard and they're at the command line, sometimes you'll see someone who just flies through stuff and they're just kicking off commands and like just throwing all kinds of different arguments in it and all whatever, and you're like, dang, son, like that's impressive, and you can tell that they're doing something that is of a particular skill set. And then you see somebody like me who's like, what the hell? Just look up the man page on that. Can somebody Google this for me? What the hell am I doing here? Like, and so you get the idea of like, oh, okay, here's what this person's skill set is, behind the keyboard. But I can tell you as somebody, again, from an attacker standpoint, that this is something that I would look at as an attacker. If I got into an environment, I would go look at the bash history. It helps you, one, understand what that host is used for, because you're going to see a bunch of different commands being kicked off from it, but and understand a little bit more about the environment. But you might also find somebody who has put in a username or a password. Applications will normally, not have that type of information stored in your bash history. Like if it knows that, oh, I'm about to have a password field in this next thing, it will not add it to it. But if you type the command wrong and it doesn't recognize it as the correct command, it's going to get logged into your bash history. And so that username and password might end up in there. So for me, again, just collect your bash history, throw it in a central location, and look through it and see what's in there. When it comes to internal reconnaissance, like what are we looking for? We want to look for commands that are normally run by admins, right? So we're looking for who am I, or IP config, things that are like stuff that is normally not your average everyday user. You're not going to see somebody in sales normally go in and be like, oh, let me go run who am I need to know what's up over here, or oh, I need to go in and check out IP configurations and stuff like that. It's not something that's normal for that user. So we want to look for stuff like that, or things that just shouldn't be run at all, right? So like Nmap, like there are going to be certain users within your organization who are going to have that, add them to your allow list. You see any tool that is normally part of like a colleague distro being run from somebody in finance, that might be something to take a look at. We want to look for lateral movement by looking at things like new user and endpoint pairs. This is a user logging onto something that they've never logged into before. Again, so if Kevin in sales suddenly logs into the server in research and development, that's not normal. Why the hell is Kevin looking at the stuff in R&D? We want to look for new endpoint to endpoint pairs. So if we see a host that's communicating with a department that it hasn't before, if there's now suddenly traffic between two departments that have never talked, and or attempts to do those things, that's important as well. So look for user to endpoint, endpoint to endpoint, but also look for users that are running programs or logging into a system and then using alternate credentials. So they log in with one set of credentials and then they try to access something or run a program and they put in a set of alternate credentials. Again, there should be a small set of individuals who are doing this on an everyday basis. We're going to baseline this and we're going to look for that kind of stuff, and that will help us find things that are odd. And then of course, like it's 19 diggity, look for log tampering. Anybody screwing around with your logs, anybody clearing or trying to make changes, huge indicator that you're going to have an issue there. When it comes to persistence or someone hanging out in your environment, trying to stay in the environment, we want to look for things like changes to the registry, right? We also want to look at changes to the registry, not just based off of the applications that are that somebody's trying to install, or changes that somebody's trying to make, those things as from an attacker standpoint, but this also may help you discover someone who has rights or administration rights that they shouldn't have, right? So if you see that somebody's able to make changes to the registry and that person shouldn't be able to, again, we can go in and correct those permissions and reduce our attack surface. So look for stuff like that. Any scheduled tasks, creation or changes, as far as enabling or disabling tasks, again, very few individuals in your organization should be able to do that. So we want to look for those types of things. Are there new scheduled tasks being created? What are they? Are there new services that are unknown or unapproved? Find those things. These are stuff I know a lot of this stuff sounds foundational, and like I said, threat hunting is not wizardry. You're doing a lot of things that are foundational. You're just really paying attention to them. And then the indicator, so nice, I named it twice, users being added to a privileged group. Again, if somebody's getting added to a group they've never been in before, who is that and why are they suddenly in there? Another one that may seem odd, but is actually a great place to go and look at your antivirus logs. Again, if it creates a log, I want you logging it. Log it all. Log everything. But look for where files are being cleaned or quarantined from. If we have a file that gets downloaded into a download folder and is immediately recognized by by the antivirus and says like, oh yeah, that's not going to fly, get out of here, and it deletes it. That's one thing. If it's getting cleaned at a system 32, that's another, right? So if it lands in a download folder and gets cleaned, that's not an issue. But if it anywhere else and you're like, why was that there? Signs that an attacker might be or that an attacker might have installed some tools and they're being cleaned out of there. So known tools, we want to look for stuff where we're seeing something like PW dump or Mimikatz or any kind of common scanner, right? Look for stuff where it's being cleaned off of the any host, any endpoint. If you see that, that's just an indicator that something odd is going on. And now we want to focus an investigation on that particular device. What's it been communicating with in the last 2 weeks? Why is it there? Even if it gets cleaned right away, we still want to know, hey, is this, why is this taking place on here? And then look for, evidence of droppers, signs that, that somebody might be planning or staging for something later. So look at your antivirus logs. They can be really, really useful. Understand what your applications are doing, right? So look for artifacts in your shim cache or your am cache, right? This is going to tell you what's been running on those endpoints and where those things were executed from, stat count, this kind of thing. Like understand what it is that your applications are doing. Go pay attention to stuff like that. Look for signs of renamed tools. So look for executables that have the same file hash, like maybe they are approved tools, but they're running from a different location, or they're running in an odd way. So go look for that type of thing, and look for command line arguments that we know are tied to a specific tool and a specific function of that tool. Like like here I've given some examples. Like if we know like, oh, there's this tool is executable and it's trying to run, and it's like a happykittens.exe space dash capital R dash PW. Like we're like, oh, that's somebody's forwarding a port and putty. I don't care that they call it happy kittens. So look for just even command line arguments that are known. When it comes to the web side or network side of the house, looking at like web traffic and saying, okay, I'm looking at HTTP methods that are strange. So this would be stuff like a post with no get, right? There should be no reason that somebody's just posting information to our web server without actually asking for something. There's normally always a get request prior. So somebody just sending data could be someone pushing something to a tool that they've previously installed. Look for short file name scripts or things outside of your decided naming convention. So things like a.aspx, well, what the hell does that do? And that might be a developer who's just like, oh, I'm lazy. Or it might be somebody who's just trying to obfuscate the name of the tool or what the script does. I mentioned encoding before when we're talking about PowerShell and stuff, but this is true as well of query strings. So your in your address bar, your question mark equals blah blah blah, and you have your what is essentially normally just base 64. But why is it in base 64? Like back in the day, it used to just flat out say like cat etsy password, right? But now we get a blob of base 64. We just want to take a look at it and see what it is. Anything like a low number of HTTP headers. So if when somebody makes a web request or gets a response from a web server, there's normally a ton of different HTTP headers that are in there that tell them stuff about the operating system, about the web server, about the amount of content you're about to get. All of these different things exist, and they're all in those headers. So if you see something like 6 or less of those headers within that HTTP request or response, it's odd, right? That's odd. We want to look at it and say, well, that's the kind of thing that machines do, or maybe a script does. Well, what's that doing? Look for stuff like direct to IP communication. Again, this is groundbreaking stuff, right? Direct to IP, wow. But I can give you examples of direct to IP stuff that we found where we're just like, why is this communicating direct to IP? Humans don't communicate direct IP. I don't say like, this is a really great website, you should go check it out. It's 64.218.17. Whatever. Like we just don't do that. We say, here's your host, right? So So go look for direct IP communication, or where an individual is specifying a port number. So we do this all the time because we're giant nerds, right? So I'm sure if you're running like a server at home or something like my media server, I'm always going to specific ports. But most average users aren't. I would pretty much guarantee that like my dad has never gone to a site somewhere and specified the port number in the address bar. I'd be willing to take that bet. So look for stuff like that. Again, normal for certain users, but not normal for everybody. And as long as we're adding things to our allow and deny list, we'll find ourselves in a good place. Look for strange or missing refers, right? Everybody likes to know how someone's getting to their website. If you've ever hosted a site before, this is the analytics where you're like, oh, we got links from some blog, right? And who sent us here? But if you're seeing traffic that's suddenly coming from a region or from a website that's known bad, and you're getting that type of traffic coming in, that's strange. Why is that showing up? Why are we getting a bunch of traffic from, Asia when we don't do any business there? We're a bank and we're only in the U.S. So we pay attention to things that are strange, or if they're just flat out missing. Most of the time, you're coming from somewhere. So look for that kind of stuff. Missing or mismatched content length. So this breaks the RFC, right? If this is missing or mismatched, we need to know how much content we're about to receive. If the attacker has written a tool, I've seen several tools that do this where they hard code something in like 4096 and the content length actually changes outside of that space. And so they're just like, I don't really care. I'm just going to hard code this in here. I'm never going to go over this. So look for that kind of stuff. And then old, strange, or short user agent strings being, tell you a lot about the operating system, browser, all the stuff that is making the request. If a user agent isn't there, that's odd. That shouldn't happen. If it's old, like you're like, oh, like somebody just came to this in Netscape Navigator Gold. That's weird. But like look for stuff like old versions of Internet Explorer, old versions of Mozilla, stuff like that. Because if those things are coming from within your organization, you have updates that aren't taking place. It's a good way to say, okay, we need to make sure that those machines get updated. And if their browsers aren't getting updated, there might be a good chance that some other things on those endpoints aren't being updated as well. So just good stuff to go find. IT is going to love you finding all this work for them. It's just going to love you. The thing is, it does reduce the attack surface. So please go find this stuff and then do it. All right. When it comes to DNS, right? DNS is just a gold mine of fun stuff. Like we want to look for stuff like dynamic DNS. So this is still commonly used for command and control, or things like users connecting to a file server at home, or a media server at home. So policy violation type of stuff, but it does happen. So look at dynamic DNS. There's interesting stuff that's in there. Look for signs of domain generation algorithms. So if you domains where there's like really long domains, strings of like 4 consecutive consonants, that kind of thing, go look and see what what's behind that. Domain generation algorithms are essentially like it's like having a multi-factor authentication thing. So you've got like a 2-factor authentication token that updates every minute, and I have some seed data and you know that as well, and so we know that our number is going to be the same at this minute and this minute and this minute. Well, DGA is the same way, except that both sides know that the host is going to change and that the host is going to change to something else, and it's going to do that every hour, or 12 hours, or 24 hours, whatever that is. And so they never lose communication to their malware or to their web shell or whatever, but the domain is constantly changing. And that's why things like threat intelligence that's just host names, IP addresses, file hashes, stuff like that isn't very valuable, because it's only valuable for a short amount of time. And then if somebody just rolls their domain, now it doesn't matter that you block communication to it. So I did check with Trenton earlier. He said I could go over a couple of minutes, so I'm going to. So if you hate it, you can run away. I won't be offended. But I did check and say, hey, I have a lot of stuff. Is it cool if I know I'm still talking fast, but I just wanted to cover a bunch of stuff with you guys. So look for DNS lookups to .onion addresses or or browser processes that aren't the Tor browser looking up .onion addresses, right? We do this because this could be an indicator that somebody is in the early stages of a ransomware attack within your organization. The first machine that somebody doesn't understand that they need to use Tor to go to something, and suddenly .onion requests start showing up. Or you just want to know, why is this individual at our organization looking up .onion addresses? So go look for stuff like that. When it comes to DNS tunneling, look for things like a large number of subdomains. So this is a great way to slowly exfiltrate data, right? You've got a host and you're just going to make a call out to a subdomain and change that subdomain every time you do. Encoding data into whatever you are requesting that subdomain is a good low and slow type of way to move data out of an environment. It takes a long time. It used to be you'd see giant long subdomains, but that attackers caught on that we caught on a long time ago, and now you don't really see stuff around like 16 characters or something. So a large number of a single subdomain may be just like command and control, or a small set of machines that are calling out to a large number of a single subdomain, like that kind of thing. Look for stuff like that. High volumes of null and text records, a little bit more bandwidth to exfiltrate data out of the environment. Or sometimes you'll just see straight up file transfer over DNS, right? And what's funny about this one is, one, this you just have to be careful because you can trip on zone transfer sometimes, but you'll also trip on antivirus vendors. Sometimes antivirus vendors will take or be like, oh, I want to make sure I send this data back to myself, or I send this file back to me. I want to get this out of here. And there are several antivirus vendors and security tools as well that do file transfer over DNS to make sure they get what they want. So sometimes we'll see like a DNS tunnel or with a file transfer going out over DNS, and we're like, oh, snap, look at this. And then we're like, no, it's Sophos. Yeah, just, but it's great to go look at. So. And then when we're talking about hunting in encrypted traffic, right? Well, it's encrypted and there's nothing we can do about that. So let's pack it up, pack it in. We're done. The thing about encrypted traffic is that the metadata is still incredibly valuable. You can find out a lot of information just by looking at source and destination IP, session sizes, session length. There's things that you can infer, like, is this person transferring a lot of information out based on the amount of outbound information, based on the client type, the certificates. You can learn stuff from it. And if you're using something as well like JAW3, where you can get higher confidence in what those client server applications are that you're that are communicating encrypted. But the thing is, and I can say that we started tracking the amount of encrypted traffic on the Black Hat network many moons ago. And what we saw was year over year, we'd see about a 5% increase in encrypted traffic, which is great. We'd love to see all the traffic encrypted, right? But it does make it hard for us to look at attacks and things like that, because we're seeing these large amounts of encrypted traffic. So with when you have 70 to 80% of your traffic encrypted, it's time to start looking at a decryption solution. One of the things that I will caution, though, and again, just advice from Grifter type of thing, is that even if your security tool can do decryption, it might not be a good idea to have it do that, right? There's a lot of tools that will say like, oh yeah, we can do native decryption. It's fine. You just check this box. But the thing is, decryption is incredibly resource intensive, right? So if you're buying this expensive security tool and then you check that box, but that tool was sized to do a specific task, and now it's suddenly also doing decryption, it's going to cripple that application or that device. And so make sure that when you are sizing out a tool or you're looking at it and a vendor comes to you and says, oh yeah, we can do decryption, that you say, okay, but what's the performance impact of doing decryption on your tool? Am I going to have to buy 40% more of whatever service it is that you're selling me, or 40% more shiny boxes to put in a data center because you had me check that box, where a third-party solution that's maybe dedicated to doing that decryption would be a better spend of your organization's money. So please, if you're thinking about doing decryption, consider that. And again, that's just a little bit advice from Grifter, and that is what I've got. So thanks. Oh yeah, yay me. Good job, me. Good job, me. I
All
love you,
right.
me.
Yes. Good job, you. Thank you so much. That's
Yay,
awesome. That's a
me.
lot of, as a long team red teamer, Grifter is the person that I don't want threat hunting me. That was awesome. So thank you for all that knowledge. We are going to take a break. We've got the next speaker up. Will be Michael Aguilar talking about medical device hacking, which is I think is going to be a really interesting topic. Just to see all of the things that we depend on from a health perspective, and then the security ramifications of those devices. So join us back here in about 45 or 50 minutes for the next talk. Otherwise, we'll have a short break for everybody to just step out of VR and enjoy the real world for a few minutes. So.
And that's what I look like in real life. So if you see me at a con, hopefully this summer, if you're vaccinated, then I'll see you at a con. Just come up and say hi, and I will be vaccinated and accepting hugs. So I look forward to seeing you guys. I got my second shot yesterday, and I didn't get super sick. So woot. But yeah, thanks everybody.